great knowledge about the beginning of the C&O Canal and also just the canal in general from his viewpoint from Williamsport. John Frye worked at, well, let me go back. For years and years, he was the curator of the Western Maryland Room in the downtown library in Hagerstown. And he is the person responsible for everything in the room. He has a great deal of experience. He will be talking about the early days of the canal, people that were in Williamsport with Douglas, and his experience with Douglas started in 1958. And I guess he is comfortable answering questions more than talking, but maybe he can talk a little bit about the early people in Williamsport in particular that he was familiar with. He was invited by Douglas to start walking with them in the Reunion Heights, which was sort of a close hike. I think he can explain it with Douglas. But he's here with his son Dennis. Dennis himself is the author of history of the Civil War. He was a historian, retired historian at Harpers Ferry National Park, and has written a lot of publications about history and the Civil War. So I guess Tim Snyder knows John better than I know John, Tim, can you say something?
Hello, everyone. Dave Dahl back there, by the way, is recording this for Antietam Broadband. So I wanted to give you notice of that. So thank Dave for doing this on our behalf to preserve a little history. I was asked by Johnny to introduce John. I've probably known John since, I'm thinking, the mid-90s or so. And I called him yesterday to get some background information. I'm giving a formal introduction here. John Clinton Frye joined the Army as a young man during the Korean War, 1953, and he served for 1 year active duty, 7 years in the reserves. After active duty, after a time, he applied to be a draftsman with Washington County, with the Washington County government in Maryland. And that led to a 30-year career as the head of the maps department, and he retired in 1983. Now, when he was working, he became interested in the C&O Canal and its preservation. He was an early member of, as Johnny mentioned, the Williamsport C&O Canal Club. And Dick Ebersole, he has some brochures from meetings that these organizations had. There was about 5 C&O Canal clubs locally. One at Hancock, for example. They were early local preservation organizations that predated the C&O Canal Association. So it was this organization that selected John to accompany Justice Douglas on a portion of the 1958 reunion. It was in that same year, upon the nomination of Justice Douglas, that John became a member of the C&O Canal Association. Now, upon John's retirement from the map department in 1983, he became a part-time seasonal ranger with the C&O Canal, now a National Historic Park. And he was in that role, a seasonal ranger from 1983 to 1998. Essentially a part-time seasonal role. While working, John also became, again, as Johnny mentioned, the curator of the Western Maryland Room at the Washington County Free Library. It's now called in his honor the John Clinton Frye Western Maryland Room. And that's where I got to know John. Many historians and researchers had to go to that room. That's where the special collections are, the non-circulating books, etc. are. So kind of a beehive of research activity. If John didn't know the answer to your question, he knew who was working on that topic and could refer you. So it really was an interesting place to be, and John was at the center of it. And I cleared this with John yesterday. I talked to him about his biography. I cleared this personal kind of vignette to relate to you. It's kind of a humorous story, but I was researching the book that I eventually wrote that came out in 2011. It's about the C&O Canal during the Civil War. And I don't remember all the details that I encountered, because it was probably about 20 years ago. But I must have been telling John about this research I've done through the official records. And I found all this information about Confederate activity and interest in the Paw Paw Tunnel, right? The Paw Paw Tunnel. And John said, wait a minute, you got to be careful. And he went to relate a story about how he used to take these long groups of 40 to 50 people. As a seasonal ranger up to the Paw Paw Tunnel, he would tell them these stories about the military activity around the Paw Paw Tunnel. And to a mutual friend of ours, Steve French of Hedgesville, West Virginia, told John, "You're wrong. That's the Beano Railroad Paw Paw Tunnel, not the Cino Canal Paw Paw Tunnel." So I went back to the official records of this stuff. As a historian, you got to check these things out. You just can't take people's word for it. You got to go back to the sources. So I went through the letters, followed this letter leading to this letter, went through 6 or 8 letters, and you know what? They're talking about the railroad. So John saved me from putting that big error in my book that came out in 2011. So that's how helpful John could be. Being in the center of these resources that circulated around the Western Maryland. So with that, I think we're ready to get started. More of a Q&A format. Dennis Frye.
So I know how Dad would like to do this evening, so I just want to make sure that everybody understands that this is not a lecture, and he's not going to lecture to you, but he very much is interested in engaging with you on what questions you might have. And so think of this as a forum, a give and take type of discussion back and forth. And so I've facilitated a lot of these types of programs over the decades, and so there's a couple of important ground rules that everybody needs to understand. One is that when you ask your question, make sure you yourself are asking a question and you yourself are not giving a lecture. That's number one, because there's a lot of stories out there. All of you have great stories to tell also, but tonight's not the night for you to tell your stories. So just be alert on that. I always have to watch myself when I'm in the audience. When I'm a part of this type of forum. So that's rule number one. Rule number two is when you ask your question, make sure that we can hear it, please. And then what we'll do is we'll repeat the question before Dad actually responds so that all of you can hear it over the mic. But that's really important for us, is to be able to articulate your question that you're asking. And then rule number 3 is he can go as long as he wants on any question. If he's got a lot to say about something, he will. If he's got 2 words to say about something, he'll summarize it in 1 word. So don't be surprised that some of these responses might be short, curt, and others might be more expansive, because he'll tell his story as he wishes to tell his story. And so I know you've been looking forward to this. This is a very exciting moment for Dad. He's now 90 and a half years old, and he can still do a lot. We even talked about having meeting some of you today as part of the hike, and we decided not to do that because he wanted to focus on this evening and be sharp for you this evening to be able to respond to your questions. But the Cino Canal Association, I can only say is it's been part of my life because it was a big part of his life. And growing up, we spent a lot of time on the Cino Canal, not only doing his level, but just hiking. And I remember going on some of the local Douglas hikes when they were here in this area back in the 1960s. And so, again, thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for continuing the tradition and legacy of the association. Thank you all for organizing this as leaders here this evening. And we look forward to being able to share some memories of a person who truly did walk with Douglas. And so with that, Dad, why don't we begin with this? I'll ask the first question. Tell us about your how you got interested in the Cino Canal to begin with.
Boy, they're finally going to let me talk. It's not that I couldn't give a lecture, it's just that when they asked me about whether we could do this, and I said, well, we can do it, but I don't see how we can do it as a lecture. So that's why we're sort of doing the Q&As. What's the question?
How did you first get interested in the canal?
Oh, okay. See how I read the question already? That was pretty simple. When I was a kid in the 1940s, my granddad loved to fish. And he didn't have a boat, so we had to fish in the toll from the bank. He'd sit all day, very seldom to the fish bite anyway, so he would talk. And one of the things he'd talk about was right behind me was the canal, which at that time wasn't growing up a whole lot. Still had water in a lot of places. And so when he would talk about the canal boats and the mules and carrying the horns and so forth, it piqued an interest in the canal. So that's a simple answer. Ever since I've pre-teens, I've had an interest in canals and especially seeing them.
So, Billy, do you have a question?
So John, tell the members here how you became a member of the Sino Canal Association.
I think I became a member before it was the C&O Canal Association. I don't know when does anybody know what day, what year you actually go back to as far as when the association really started as an association? I don't really know because, but anyway, 1958 was the 4th year of the anniversary of the famous Douglas hike, and it was headquartered at Williamsport. They hiked upstream, and the C&O Canal Association, which had just formed with the idea of the possibility of the canal becoming part of the National Park System, they wanted someone to meet and walk with the Douglas group. And so another gentleman from Williamsport, Charlie Payne, and myself, with their wives, met the Douglas group at Tone Fish and Game Club and walked to Williamsport. And it was very unusual for Justice Douglas to stop. But for some reason that day, somewhere on the walk, he stopped. And I remember, I can picture in my mind yet today, him sitting on a tree stump, relaxing and talking. And Greg Conway, who had sort of been a liaison between the Washington group and the Williamsport group, said to me, and Charles, would you like to be a member of the association? He was, yeah, sure. So he went over and he told Justice Douglas, and he made the motion that Charlie Payne from Williamsport and myself become members of the association. You have to remember, back then it was still a closed group. You didn't pay your $25 and join like we do today. And so that's how I became a member in that first year of what I don't know what they called the association at that time, but it wasn't anything like it is today.
You talking about?
Do you recall names of people in Williamsport that walked with Douglas? You say it was a closed group and that people were invited to hike with them for their reunion hikes in the 50s. You mentioned Greg Conway.
Yeah, well, of course, Greg Conway was from the D.C. area. I think he lived in Brooklyn, I think. But Williamsport, we had people like some of you have heard the names, but one of the main persons is George Hooper Wolf. Adam Marsh was our secretary. Our first president was Chick Myers. We had instances of everybody. I did want to say one thing here. I never lived in Williamsport. Let me get that straight then. If you become part of Williamsport, you have to be indoctrinated into Williamsport. You just don't walk in. Anyway, where were we here?
About Williamsport.
Oh, the foul, yeah. Abner Kaplan later became the president of the group. I can't think of all of them that was in it. Bugs Teach. Everybody in Williamsport has a nickname. And so I really don't know what their real names were. I do know Hooper Wolf's name is George, but in most cases everybody in Williamsport has a nickname. So those are some of the few people that formed the C&O Canal Club in Williamsport, and I don't remember some of you may know or have read, I don't think really that Justice Douglas had the idea that it become part of the National Park System because it already was owned by the National Park Service. He just wanted to keep it wilderness. And so I really think the idea to become a part of the National Park System was born in Williamsport with that group of Williamsport Cedar Canal people. But I can't say that for sure.
I am a Williamsporter. You have to be born there. I haven't lived there for 60 years, but you're always a Williamsporter, always born there. You never. You're always one of those. So. I was given a program for the 1963 Douglas Hike and Reunion. It was the 90th annual. And I remember I brought it to you at the Western Mailroom because it blew my mind to see who the guests of honor were at that reunion. Should you talk a little about the 63? Bobby Kennedy was supposed to be. He was Attorney General at the time. And the program listed Bobby Kennedy, the Attorney General, was supposed to be there. Stuart Udall, the Secretary of the Interior, was supposed to be there. Justice Douglas was supposed to be there. And Charles Mathias, who was the 6th District Congressman at the time, was supposed to be there. But when I showed it to you, you thought about it, and I said, you know, I don't remember Bobby Kennedy being there. And you had me go, you said, go research this, like John does a lot. He kept showing things that you should research. And it turns out that Bobby Kennedy wasn't, but he sent the Secretary of Agriculture, Robert Freeman, in his place. So, and I know you hiked with the Kennedy kids, right? They were there. So could you talk a little about that hike with the
that wasn't the year that we walked with the Kennedy kids, and I think they were probably Robert's children.
Yeah.
And I don't know which one because you know they had quite a family. But that year that I remember walking with the Kennedy kids was a walk from Point of Rocks to Harper's Ferry, and that was the year that Judge Douglas dedicated the hostel that's at Sandy Hook now. You may have used it. That was a tavern before they bought it and turned it into the youth hostel that's there today. And we stopped there for the judge to dedicate that. And then I took the group up on Maryland Heights. And I don't know where we went after that, I don't remember. But walking with the Kennedy children, and I think maybe some of their cousins were with them. I don't remember all their names. Well, they were typical teenagers, and the only thing I remember is we got to Brunswick because I was up front and the kids were up front with me, and so we got to Brunswick before Justice Douglas and the contingent. This is not 63, but it was in the early 60s. And I remember the town of Brunswick had a large lunch spread set up for the group. And the kids jived right, as soon as they got there, they dived right in to eat. And the gentleman in charge, some of you may have known him, was Sonny Cannon, who practically ran Brunswick back years ago. And he shooed the Kennedy kids away, not knowing who he was dealing with. I tried to tell him, and no, Sonny wouldn't listen to anybody. So but that wasn't in Williamsport. I don't know. The one I think, the only thing I can remember that one at Williamsport as there was a congresswoman from out west by the name of Gracie Post that was against Canal Park. And incidentally, there were a lot of people against it. It's hard to believe how many. But so we came up with the idea to invite her to Williamsport for the Douglas reunion. And I think that was the year you're talking about. We had all those guests. And But Bobby Kennedy was supposed to be there, was not. But you're right, World War III. And, so that was a different time. So I don't know whether the Kennedy children was on that one or not. They may have been, but I remember walking with them on the one from Porter Rocks to Harvest.
63 was Robert Kennedy Jr. and Joe Kennedy, and one of the Shriver kids.
Oh, that's right, that's the cousins, I couldn't remember. The Shriver, one of the Kennedy daughters was married to Shriver, that's great, yeah.
So Dad just talked about something that I want to make sure all of you hear this story. You know, when we think of the C&O Canal as a national park, of course it's a national park. Of course it is. But it wasn't. And he mentioned very, very briefly a moment ago that there were a lot of people opposed to the national park. And so that becomes a battle. And I'm going to ask you to share that with you. I myself have been in a lot of battles to preserve places. And it's hard. And it takes, not only does it take the preservation, but it takes the perseverance. Because they go on and on and on. The battle that he waged to make the canal a national park was more than a decade-long battle, where he committed himself along with others to do that. So Dad, I'd just like for you to talk about some of the hurdles that you faced in the community, some of the individuals that were your opponents, some of the corporations and businesses that fought you tooth and nail to prevent the C&O Canal from becoming a national park.
Well, there were a lot more against it than for it. Today, when those of you that have come in later, you would just not realize it. But believe it or not, well, right off the bat, the state of Maryland was very, very much against it becoming a national park. I knew personally the gentleman that was head of the what they called Department of Forests and Parks back then, called Lee McHale. And he actually went around over the state and campaigned and came up here and campaigned against it becoming a national park because they had good reason. The state of Maryland was afraid that if the federal government took over control of the entire north shore of the Potomac River from Washington to Cumberland, that it would no longer be controlled by the state of Maryland. So that was their basic idea. So the state wanted the National Park Service or the federal government to divide it into parcels. Give a parcel to the town of Williamsport, a parcel to the town of Hancock, and so forth, so that they could develop however they wished. So the state of Maryland was big opposition. Hagerstown Chamber of Commerce was against it. They were afraid it would keep industry from utilizing the Potomac River. The city of Hagerstown, which gets its main water supply from the river, wasn't what you call against it, but they were afraid of it because they were afraid that they would run into all kinds of federal requirements to get water from the river. Well, Pennsylvania Glass Sand, which at that time was a big organization in Berkeley Springs, they were against it. And it was just hard, actually, believe it or not. It was hard actually to find anybody except our association, Williamsport C&O Canal Club, little club at Hancock, they called it Hancock C&O Canal Club, but to be for the park. If you really wanted to look at it, probably I would say there was 75% opposition to the 25% that wanted it. So we had to overcome that through the years. And we were not the rabble-rousing type of demonstrations like we're seeing on campuses today. You worked behind the scenes. You worked on your legislators. You worked with your legislators, people like Mac Mathias, who later became senator, a good old Byron, who was very instrumental in actually becoming a park. We work behind the scenes with those type of people. Good example, there was a gentleman named, I think his name was Foley, that was elected to Congress from the 6th District, over which canal most of it was in. And we could not get through to him what we wanted. In fact, he had things so mixed up that he had, I think, 4 different bills introduced for 2 different types of parks. So we took care of him. He only served 2 years. I remember there was a state senator, very prominent man by the name of Bloom, here from Washington County. I can still see him standing up straight, talking about how he was against it. It wasn't long before he wasn't in office. So we work behind the scenes to create things like that, which eventually began to turn the tide. And it took from, well, the time that Douglas did his walk in 54 until 72, we finally did get it. And that was a pleasant day. But as all of you know, when we did get it, we still got it with restrictions. A lot of you don't know that but there were 4 large major game clubs along the river. One in Allegheny County, one here, one in Frederick County, and one in Montgomery County, down at White's Ferry. And they had enough influence that every time you bring it up to stop it. So if you read the original law, it gives them all kinds of protection, which was the only way we got this part. And today, I know the club in Allegheny County is going. I think the one in White's Ferry was closing down some years ago, but the main one at Goldfish Name Club there in Washington County is still in operation. But that was one of the few things we had to give into to become the park that we have today. But there was a tremendous amount of opposition when we first started to work on hoping one day to have a national park or a division of the National Park Service along the canal.
I just got one more here, Tim, and that is because he's told me this story and he likes to tell this story, and I think you all will enjoy it. There was a time that Justice Douglas got in trouble during a hike, and Dad was part of that trouble and experienced it. And this is one of those stories that you only hear about if you were there. And so tell us a story about Justice Douglas getting himself in trouble on a muddy day.
This is really hard to believe, but actually it did happen. One of the early Douglas hikes was down in the DC area. We started at Great Falls and went downstream. Day like today, cold, rainy, miserable, muddy, and back then, even down there, the towpath wasn't as good a shape as in today. So we traipsed along in the rain, and we were dressed in our rain gear with rain jackets. I remember walking along, at that time still a lot of the politicians, senators, representatives would come out and walk with Judge Douglas. I remember walking a long way with, I think it was Senator Paul Douglas from Illinois. I think I walked and talked with him for quite a way. But anyway, as you progress down the stream from Great Falls, you go by a place there called Angler's Inn. Some of you may have been there. I was only there one time and got tossed out. Anyway, we got there, and it was a real plush place at that time. And Judge Douglas went in and sat at the bar. I think he ordered a beer. And a couple of people that were walking with him went up and sat beside of him. And all of us tripping along behind, we gradually all walked in, and down at the tables. We were carrying our own lunch, so we didn't order anything to eat. So I can remember just about the time that I was ready to unpack my lunch. I just opened the sack. This lady came down the stairs, raising heck. I don't know whether she was doing any vulgarity. You tramps, get out of here. And she threw Douglas out. And the rest of us, of course, when he went out, we all went out with him. And I was going out the door, and the Secretary of the Interior was on the walk that day. I believe it was Stuart Udall. Does that make? I think he was the Secretary of the Interior. Anyway, when I went out the door, he was going in, and I said, "Sir, don't go in there, she'll throw you out." He didn't get in very far, turned right around, come back out. That lady threw that whole contingent of pretty prominent people out of the anglers in, but she had good reason. We were all muddy, wet, boots were muddy. You can imagine what we were doing to that place to start with. And we didn't order anything. He may have ordered a beer, but the rest of us had our own sack lunches. So that was pretty much of an experience to see the Supreme Court justice and the contingent of DC officials tossed out of the anglers in. That actually happened.
Yeah, Dennis, if you didn't ask that question, that's one I was going to make sure that John related. We talked to John a couple months ago, pre-interviewed him, you could say. One question that people may want to hear answered is, since you hiked with Douglas a little bit, I'm sure you interacted a little bit, he nominated you for the association. What was he like? What was your experience with him? His personality, etc.?
Well, as you picked up on that long introduction, I hate long introductions, that I worked at the courthouse for 30 years, almost 30 years. I knew how to work with politicians. So when you're with a politician, you never, ever, ever mention anything about their job, about politics. They're just like you are, and that's the way you encounter them. So that was the way that when we walked along with Justice Douglas, just like I would be walking with you today, we'd walk along and talk. He was just another hiker on the Canal towpath, like the rest of us. So that was the way, like as I said, at that time when we tossed out the anglers in, I walked for maybe an hour or so longer with that senator from Illinois, just casual talk back and forth. So the experience of walking with William Douglas on the towpath is just as if I was out walking with you today. Very simple.
Before we came to visit you, John, Johnny and I had a chance to go through the Western Maryland room and look at that huge collection of stuff you've collected about the C&O Canal. In that collection is a box that have items that actually belong to William O. Douglas. How did you come about having this canteen?
That's the association collection. Back before you had any place to keep any of the association records, they knew about the Western Maryland room and knew about me being there. So the association worked with the library to take the Douglas collection that they had. His canteen, if you see pictures of the Douglas hike, he always has that round canteen hanging in front of him. That's in that collection. Some papers, I don't remember what all that he had noted and written, and I can't remember.
There's a journal in there.
There's a journal?
Journal, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, but that belongs to you. That belongs to the association. But the only way I would take anything from the library is if you put it in the library, it is the library's collection. So that, you can recall that collection to show it. In fact, when you first gave it to the library, a couple of the association meetings, I would take some of that collection out for when you had, I guess, when you had this walk. But one of the spring meetings that you had, so you could look at it and see it. But that loan, and I said to the association, we don't have a place to put it. They said, we'll take care of that. So that cabinet that's there, that also belongs to the association. So really, that's the association's collection of the early Douglas material put there forever to be protected. And so they have you all have a right to recall that anytime you want to. But that doesn't belong to the library, except it's got to stay there since that was the agreement.
It's a huge collection. I mean, hundreds, boxes and boxes.
Yeah. So that's what that is. That explain it?
Yeah, that is.
Tim would take all these questions.
We did want to open up to questions from the audience. Just think about something you may have. I have one more for John, and then if you can have a question for him, we can bring you forward and you can address your question. One thing we talked about a couple months ago was the difference between the Douglas group and the Sino Canal clubs. Can you tell us more how they were different, how they were similar?
Well, they were similar to preservation of the canal, so that's pretty simple. As I say, I think Judge Douglas' idea was to preserve it for just what he did. Get out there and walk anytime he wished in the wilderness. Once we pushed along with the association and the canal clubs and the individuals to make it into a part of the national park system, it's gone further than that. And none of the fears that the advocates against it have ever taken place. Sure, you do have to get a permit to cross it, but I know Potomac Edison, they mentioned that they were one of the ones that were against it because they like to cross the canal whenever they could. They have to get permits to do that today. But there's most of the fears that folks had against the park never materialized, and it works great today. The state has no problems with it. The cities and adjacent to it have no problems with it at all. In fact, most of them are glad that it's there. But does that answer what do you had?
You mentioned the difference between the Sino Canal clubs and the association. You had talked about how.
Oh, the clubs themselves and the association. Well, the clubs that were established, like the Williams Sports Arena and Canal Club, it quit operation really after it became a park. Whereas the association here today is very much ongoing, and you all have several meetings a year, and you're very much involved. In fact, the association became the complete guiding light on citizen input today. And none of the clubs like Wake Forcino Canal Club or Hancock or whatever was in any other areas, they don't exist today. So the difference is longevity more than anything else. I think the fact that we are very much in operation today where the other clubs are gone.
We want to bring people with questions up here so they can be on the mic.
Sure. Anybody have a
Questions?
question?
Questions for
I'd love
John?
to hear it. And,
Come on up, Joel. Come up, Joel.
the C&O Canal in 1961. That's a good 10, 12, 15 years before the rest of the country started to become kind of conservationist. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how he became such an early conservationist, if he discussed that on his walks, and what inspired him and so forth.
You mean how Justice Douglas
Yes,
became?
yes.
I really don't know.
I stumped him.
Well, no, I never, there's books written by Douglas, there's books written about Douglas. I just happen to know him like I know these people here, or would know you, and so I really never really studied. Now, I do know that he was instrumental in other places in preservation too. I think out west and some, I don't know just where all, but he just was in all of his capacities, because I think he went on to court back 38, 39, through the years, was a conservationist, and his basis behind that, I don't know. I don't even guess. So, like I said, I'd be just like I'll be out in the world with you today, and I don't know what your interest would be. I never really talked to him about it, and I used to have a book that I had him autographed, but I didn't even read the book. Just so I have a book that he had written in his autograph. So to me, he was just another walker, just like you folks. And as I said, I worked in a courthouse for 30 years, so I hate to say it this way, but politicians have unimpressed me completely. They're just as average as we are. And if any of them would make you think otherwise, that's not so. So to me, walking with Judge Douglas was just like if I would have been with you folks today in the rain. I'm glad I wasn't, but I could have been. So I can't really say, I don't know anything about his autobiography or his biography at all. I've never read it. That's available. I've never done that. But then I don't think I ever did have any politicians. So.
Other questions out there? Dr. Steve?
I knew this was coming.
Well, I was struck a little bit when you talked about Justice Douglas and his vision of the canal. He described it as a wilderness and preserve the wilderness. And I wonder nowadays, I don't think very many people would call the canal a wilderness, and it's a recreational facility or it's available to people. But I was wondering, how is the vision of Douglas and what was the canal like in the 1950s as compared to what the canal is like now?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. It was nothing like it is today. The first place, I don't know whether any of you here have been around long enough that you walked on the canal back in that period, but every mile or so you had to crawl over a fence because the farmers fenced clear through to the river. So you wouldn't have ridden your bicycle because you couldn't have gotten through. So I remember, in fact, even after it became, what was it before it became a park? What was it called?
National Monument.
Monument. After it became a monument, the first superintendent here was a guy named Mac Dale, and he was it. He had one ranger and one secretary, and that was the whole thing from Great Falls to Cumberland. And I used to ride with him a lot, to just get out on the canal. And he would have to, if he's driving on the canal, he'd have to stop, go open the gate, go through the gate, shut the gate. So one day down in Montgomery County, he said, I'm tired of shutting those gates. We went up the canal, he left the gates open, and cows everywhere. But that's what it was like. When Douglas walked it, there were a lot of places where he probably had to detour. I couldn't point those out, but they either would have been a fit to walk on, or either somewhere they get out there. But even after it became a national monument, you had, as I say, things like fences that you had to cross or gates you had to open, and that's all gone now. So Doctor, it may not be a wilderness like you consider a jungle wilderness, but compared to all this metropolitan sprawl that's happened all over our area on both sides of the river since 1954, it is a wilderness. So it's where you can, the Justice Douglas idea, where I can go out, relax, meditate, listen to the wildlife, and so it is a wilderness, but what would you say, it's a controlled wilderness.
We got together some newspaper articles over Douglas, like when we were preparing for this. There's some interviews with Douglas, and his vision that he gave, at least to the interviewer, was a wilderness, but picnic area here, a campground here, just up and down the river. So there's ways to access it, wasn't just a wild wilderness, inaccessible. It would be recreational areas. Other questions?
I've got a question for the audience. How many of you know the Washington Post letter story?
Washington Post letter.
What story? A letter.
The letter.
To the Washington Post.
Well, let me, John, if you don't mind, I'm going to tell them about this story. It's so wonderful. Is that all right?
You guys are like, so they get on the,
I told the story a couple of times at a reunion after a couple of drinks, and everybody appreciated it, and I hope you will. The canal in 38 was, the Washington Post endorsed the plan to make it a parkway. You know that story? Okay. And they had a letter. And Justice Douglas wrote the famous letter and says, come walk with me and I'll show you the vision that I have about the parkway, and we'll make it something other than something for motor vehicles. And so that was the walk. Correct me, Paul?
That's correct.
And so they went on this walk, and I was fortunate enough to go with some of those people that went on that walk, and they went on it and came back, and there were members of the Post that went on it, and they came back and retracted their endorsement, and we have the Steno Canal. It's a wonderful story. And if you ever get a chance to, it's like reading the Bible. It's Justice Douglas said, "Come with me, and I'll show you one." And it's a wonderful experience to read that. I worked on the canal, and I'll tell you one more little anecdote. There was an artist by the name of Wendy, somebody, I've forgotten her name, and she made a sculpture of Justice Douglas, and we were called down to be there at the ceremony of endorsing it. And we were all sitting around, and there were 7 justices in the Supreme Court with him, and Justice Douglas was there. And somebody one of the justices said, there are only 7 of us, and he said, that's all right, it's a quorum. And we went on with the speech, but it was a wonderful moment. I cherish my work on the Cedar Canal. I still love it, and love all of you for doing such a good job in keeping it an entity. Thank you.
Just to add to that, on the first probably 10 years, that contingent of people from the Post and I think Post Robert Graves, I think was the name of the writer that was with him, and Lou Sullenberger from CBS. Those people stayed with Douglas on the reunions for at least probably 10 years, and I talked to and remember them very well. And you're exactly right. It was publicity by folks like them that were with Justice Douglas that really put up the national momentum to make it into a park. And that's a good point, very good.
Just a quick question. I believe after Douglas was no longer able to walk the canal, his wife did. Did you ever have the opportunity to walk with her?
Which one?
How many were there?
He had 3 while I knew him. I knew all 3. I met all 3 of them. None of them walked with him, I don't think, but they were always there. And the last 2 of his wives were rather young, and they really were protective of him. They really were protective of him. I will say, in the last, someone was pointing out the difference between when he walked and what's here today, would he approve? I think he would, because I was fortunate to be on the first 2 5-year shifts of the Cedar Canal Advisory Committee, or whatever it's called. I think it's still called that. Some of you may be on it. And I was in the first meeting we had when we were sworn in down in the Department of Interior building. Judge Douglas, it was, would have been 1973, I guess, because the law went into effect 72, and so in 73. He was there. He was. I remember him being there. He was not in real great shape, but he was there. So he knew what had happened. He knew what the future might be. So I think he would be very, very happy to have been with you folks today. In the rain, walking along. And like I say, you did not, you just talk with him like you talk with yourselves. And that was the way that walking with Douglas was like, is walking with you folks.
Other questions? Jim?
This might be a little bit redundant, but talking about the media coverage that they'd gotten in the original 54 hike, in other hikes that you took, was there any media coverage for any of those that kept this impetus going?
Yes, it mostly was local. Say we were hiking in Washington County, the Hagerstown papers would cover it very heavily. But the national media coverage, no, I don't think that it would make it made any national media coverage any more than the establishment of a park in the days era make. But locally, yes, but that is in Frederick County, the Frederick paper would have covered it. And so you did have publicity, but it was mostly local or regional. I don't know about international, but I don't think so. Not in my knowledge, and some folks here lived through that era, they may be able to answer that.
Others, saw someone else?
Let me just pass on one more suggestion. If you haven't read the tapes of the people that lived on the canal, get a copy. I remember a lady telling me about her experiences on the canal, and in the background I could hear her chair rock. And those tapes are worth listening to.
So, yes, Rob.
I was looking through some clips and I saw 1994 Through Hike, which the association sponsored from Cumberland to Washington. And they were supported very much by the staff of the C&O Canal Park, including Ranger John Frye. Can you tell us about your career with the Park Service?
Be nice to me.
Well, number one, I was a seasonal ranger, and not like my son, who was full-time ranger. I always said, we just got to play ranger. And it was part of my duty on the park to work with the group on that 94 hike. I happened to be on duty, and I was one of the few rangers in the park, or maybe the only one that was able to work. I worked the whole park, even though I was assigned to the middle district here. But I worked at, in fact, I actually was in charge of the opening of the visitor center in the Cumberland Railroad Station over Christmas and Holiday New Year, somewhere back there. And I was able to spend 3 or 4 weeks working on the boat in Great Falls. And not many people had the opportunity to work on a canal boat, guide a canal boat. As far as assisting on that 94 through hike, whatever my duties would have been for the day that the hike went through in certain areas, I was there doing it as a good park ranger. And I don't remember anything much about that except being on duty and doing it. So I'm sorry I can't give any of my experiences of doing that. So I would think though that that's good, because that means everything went well.
Say thank you.
Other questions?
Oh, let me. So Dad was a seasonal ranger for quite a long time, and he was based at the Antietam Campground headquarters. And many of you might remember that there actually was a ranger station that stood at the Antietam Campground. It's no longer there. And that's a good thing, because it was a concrete block, kind of garage type building, as I recall, so it wasn't very attractive. But that's where Dad was based for a long time. And Dad sometimes would have to, often work the Antietam Campground at night. And he had some interesting experiences. And so, Dad, could you just share with the group some of your more interesting or entertaining experiences associated with the Antietam Campground while you were on duty as a ranger?
A couple of them I've ever had to talk about. Working a campground at night, just anything might happen. One night there was a lady that came there ranting and raving, and she came into the ranger station and jumped all over me, and her husband was down in the campground with another woman. So it got pretty wrong. So finally, at that time, we had a pretty thin slab. I was the only one on duty. I'm not law enforcement. So I called the deputy sheriff, or called sheriff's department. We'll have someone there. It wasn't too long, but boy, sure enough, here came a deputy, came two deputies, one direction, one the other on the canal road there, which I was really impressed with. So they pulled up and I told them, I said, look, I got a real mess here. I don't know how to handle it. I said, I got two women here fighting over a man down there in the campground. And one of the deputies looked at me all and said, don't worry about it. Said they've been fighting all week. So that's one of the things. Another time I remember a lady came up to the ranger station and whoever was with, he beat her around or something. She said, you take me back home to Hagerstown. I said, no, I can't do that. I can't, number one, I can't leave. Number two, there's nobody I can get permission from to let you ride in a Park Service vehicle. So I don't know what happened, but I finally got somebody to take her home. I went down the next morning in the campground, and there she was back cooking the guys breakfast. So I don't know what other experience you should talk about, but we had sometimes some problems with people where you really needed to have law enforcement rangers come in and settle it. I remember if you stand on the hill at Ferry Hill today, there where you make a right to go into the Ferry Hill house, on the left there's a couple road signs, and one of the road signs talks about Pack Horse Ford. Well, it's a mile and a half upriver and up on a hill from Pack Horse Ford. That sign used to be at Pack Horse Ford. The state of Maryland back in, when they were putting up, I think all these historic signs for the Civil War Centennial, I had put this nice metal sign up at Pack Horse Ford, sitting on a pole and everything. And I was really proud of that, so if I did a walk there at Pack Horse Ford, you could point this sign, people could read it. So one day, one of the rangers came into the ranger station and he said, your sign's going. I said, what sign? He said, that sign that was up Pack Horse Ford. I said, what do you mean it's gone? He said, it's gone. He said, nothing there but a pole. I said, what in the world? Why would somebody want to take that sign? And sure enough, it was gone, nothing there but a pole. Shepherd College closes for the season. Ranger station gets a call. I'll pick it up. This is someone I don't know, Shepherd College. He said, you come up, pick up your sign. I said, what are you talking about? He says, your sign's up here in one of the dorm rooms. So I got the sign, picked it up, and we took it to county roads, and I had to repair the post. And figured it would go back at Pack Horse Ford. The state said, oh no, so we're not gonna put it back down there. They'll just do it again. So it's on top of the hill, right across the road from Prairie Hill. That's where you nuts there. So there are a lot of things that happen to rangers in the field. You have to remember too, I was in the Park Service when rangers still could do just about everything. There were everything from first aid to interpretation to whatever. And that was all before the Twin Towers. And things have changed now for the rangers. You have more park rangers that are law enforcement, and the ranger duties out on the canal now, in the canal itself, are more law enforcement and interpretation. I was fortunate enough to be able to work in the Park Service before all that change took place. So it's a little bit different today than what it would have been back then. But basically, at the campground or our regular duties, we were jack of all trades. We could be expected to do anything at any time, from fixing a bicycle to blowing up an inner tube for something to light a float, or whatever. That's all changed. More specialized, especially on the canal, and more law enforcement, unfortunately.
By the way, when we were interviewing John a few months ago, sitting in his living room, you can go onto the C&O Canal Station's website where all the newsletters, the past newsletters are posted there, and look at the earliest one available. You can see the positions John held with the association. I believe be the earliest one to say you were as triggered level, the level that you walked, and you were on the history committee. Do you remember other roles or positions you held in the early days of the C&O Canal Association?
No. I hate to say it, I've had such a variety of life that it all runs together. So, and it's been enjoyable, and much of the enjoyable part has been relative to the canal, the making of the park, actually being on the first canal commission that established the park as it is today. Most of you don't realize, but I talked about a parkway here a minute ago. The first vision of the park, visioned by a planner, and it's been published, and I think there's a copy in the Western Herald Reader that I kept it. But it was completely different from what park we have today. The park we have today was pretty well made by that first canal commission that was there for the first 5 years. And the first park planners' idea of the park was marina. They had a big marina, for instance, above Dam 3, above Harper's Ferry, all kinds of more recreational, heavy recreational than the solitude that we have today. And that first commission, and this has nothing to do with me walking to Douglas, I don't know how we got into this. But that first commission was the commission that set up divisions A through F, and you could have a major type of development, say at Williamsport or Brunswick or someplace, but a lot of it would be primitive, and there will never be any more development than preserving the towpath. So it would be interesting for you to, if you get a hold of that first Park Service plan of the grandiose park that they visioned, the Park Service vision, it would be nothing like we have today.
Now, one role that we know John did play in the relatively early days of the association was planning the first World Canal Conference on the C&O Canal, because we honored him for that at the last one about almost 3 years ago. So you probably can tell a few words about that.
That was a third International Canal Conference. The World Canal Conference that some of you may attend today is growing from a little get-together of canal people that a ranger on one of the Ohio canals visioned some years ago. And I think they I don't know if they had the second one there or not, but my wife and I went to the second one they had, and that was when they said to Dave Johnson and I, we were both there, C&O Canal's gonna host it. The next one, that would be the third one. So we did host the third World Canal Conference. We hosted at Harper's Ferry. It was very small then. We had mostly officials from canal parks or parks that had canals in them in the United States and Canada there. And we had a week of touring the C&O Canal, lectures. It was small enough that we had everything at the Hillside, was it Hillside Motel?
We were at the Cliffside.
Cliffside, yeah, Cliffside Motel. So, and we did tours of the tunnel and of the C&O and had lectures of not only this canal, but canals in Canada. And, we, at that time, we had the opportunity of knowing superintendents of Canadian canals personally. And so Dave Johnson and I really put that together. So that has grown too now, the World Canal Conference. But we did have the third one here on the C&O. And we called it international because luckily there was a gentleman here from England that was visiting somebody. He wasn't here because of the canal conference, and we found out about it. So we had him lecture, so that way we could call it international.
Any other questions? Dennis, if we're ready to wrap it up? One more?
So what makes the canal special to you?
Repeat that question.
Joel asked John, what makes the canal special to you?
To not give you a curt answer, the same thing that makes it special to you. Of course, I have had since my granddad talked about the canal, tremendous interest in towpath canals. And my wife and I toured canal ruins and working canals and canal vision, restorations all over the east, as far as Massachusetts to Georgia, and as far west as the Mississippi River, to various canal get-togethers. But I have just a part of my history interest, and then, you know, it's interesting, back when I first started this, no one else was really interested in canal. That's a little bit different from Denison Civil War, where it's got all kinds of experts. So shoot, there was hardly anybody that, when we first started, knew anything about canals. So it's easy to become an expert, even though you were an expert.
I think John said his voice is starting to go a little bit, so I guess you better wrap this up.
You wrap it up here, or then you wrap it up. I just want to say I appreciate your all's efforts on continuing the canal heritage that you have. Keep it up. It's good being with you this evening, and I hope I get to be with you again sometime. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you all for your attendance and for listening so carefully. I hope you take your own memories of what John has said here this evening, memories of his experiences with the C&O Canal Club in Williamsport.